Today we're exploring authentic leadership and why it's a rare species seldom found in the wild world of business. Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb shit businesses do, we ask the big juicy questions like why, what were they thinking, and then we chase down the answers. I'm Matt, a business designer, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a corporate plumber fixing the crap that business does on a regular basis.
And I'm Rob. I'm a bit of a fossil in the people and culture space. Been doing this for a long time.
So, Rob, this is one of my favorite topics to talk on. I sure know it's one of yours, but I love you to get people on the same page. What the hell is the authentic leadership stuff? And is it really all just motherhood statements?
Yeah, I share your concern about the motherhood statements there, Matt. Authentic leadership is something that's reasonably new in the leadership space. It's been around for maybe 20 years or so. And it's around making, it used to be that people would craft these wonderful masks. They would be very different people at work compared to at home. There were leadership traits that were considered, these are the traits that every leader should have, and so on. And then I think we got into more of an appreciation of the person for who they are, but also their ability to adapt to the preferred styles of their team. And I know that sounds a little contradictory. You've got to be yourself, but you've also got to adapt. But I think we'll talk about that a little later and how important that is. There is that concern around motherhood statements. It's be yourself and bring your best self to work and be the best version of yourself that you can be and stuff like this. And for people like me, that just rubs us up the wrong way. But authenticity and leadership, I think, is massively, massively important. I think it's the only way you can be a leader in a workplace and not deal with the soul destroying nature of trying to be somebody else. You've got to be you.
When I look at though, just be you, right? It sounds like an easy statement. I've heard Simon say it, stop pretending, be you.
Sure.
But my curiosity there is, what happens if you're a prick?
So yeah, I mean, this is something that I hear quite a lot, right? People almost using authentic leadership as an excuse to be the asshole that they want to be.
Yeah.
So I was dealing with a leader once. Obviously, I'll change the names here to protect the guilty. And she was doing a whole heap of stuff outside of work with some members of her team. And note that, some members of her team. Yeah. So everything she was doing was in line with, it was extracurricular stuff. It was stuff that was in line with her interests. And it just happened that there were 2 or 3 of her team members that wanted to be involved in that. But the rest of the team felt left out. And when called on this, maybe if you're going to do extracurricular stuff, you should include everybody. The response was, well, I'm just being me. This is what I want to do. And it just happens that these other people want to tag along. There was no concern around what I'm doing is including half of my team and excluding the other half. And that's a pretty dangerous thing to do. You'll also get people who are old school command and control style managers. And when you call them on it and go, that's a bit 1930s, their response is, well, that's just who I am. That's me being authentic. And you're not being authentic. You're using it as an excuse to be an asshole. And not leaning into probably one of the most important parts of authentic leadership, which is vulnerability. The bravery to be vulnerable with your team. Most of the folks that I've seen that are using authentic leadership as an excuse for assholery are basically not, they're not brave enough to be vulnerable, if that makes sense.
So hearing about the vulnerability or that aspect, that just sounds scary as hell. So this kind does that mean you open up to everybody? I mean, how does that work?
No, I don't think it means you open up to everybody. I think what it means is that you've got to shake off a lot of the stuff that you were raised with, probably a lot of the impacts of society. My dad, wonderful guy, but a very stoic dude. I think I can count on the fingers of one finger the amount of times that I saw him upset. He was just, it was a big boys don't cry kind of vibe. And that, it's not just that you don't cry, it's that feeds in such a way that you start thinking that vulnerability is something that should be avoided at all costs, that it's something that's scary, that it's something that it should just be avoided. When in fact, what you need to realize, and Brené Brown does some wonderful work on this, is that vulnerability is a superpower. People don't want to see the most polished version of you that they can. They don't want to see you with the giant Superman S on your chest. They certainly don't want to see you with your underpants on the outside. But they're not looking for the superhero. What they're looking for is a real live human being. And the best way to show that to somebody is to be prepared to be vulnerable with them, to be prepared to tell them a little bit about what's gone wrong as well as what's gone right. You know?
If I look at, though, you've talked about vulnerability there. What are the other superpowers that an authentic leader has? If we could kind of break it down for the audience, they get a bit of a clue. This is how you can tell what an authentic leader looks like. And from my experience, it's spotting them as you actually just feel different when you're around them. At least that's what happens to me. It's this moment that you feel you can absolutely trust them, because it doesn't seem, no matter what the environment is, their values are not changing. You're not left guessing in that moment. What's your take there, Rob?
Yeah, so there's a number of these superpowers that these superheroes have. People that really embrace authentic leadership. For me, you mentioned the values one, and I think that's a big deal. Their values have to be rock solid. And you'll notice that straight away with authentic leaders, is that they will rarely, if ever, compromise on their values. Their values actually become more important to them when they're under pressure, when they're dealing with real challenges. They've got a purpose, and they can articulate that. The authentic leaders that I've come across, the really authentic leaders that I've come across, will tell you exactly what they love about being leaders and what gets them out of bed in the morning. You know, they're not afraid of emotion. The heart's in there too. And they are compassionate. They're empathetic. They see those as superpowers and they lean into them. They're not afraid of the soft stuff, if that makes sense. There are a lot of leaders out there who are like, well, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. These old school sort of approaches. But authentic leaders are not afraid to get involved in the emotional connection between people, and I think that's a really big deal. They have proper relationships with people. They don't bullshit when it comes to relationships with people, and I guess I'm going to give you an example here because I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think she'll mind me mentioning her name here, but one of the best leaders I ever had in my life was Angela Foskett. She was at the time. She's Angela Howard now. And Angela, without a shadow of a doubt, the best boss I've ever had. 20 years later, I would still walk through hell for that woman. And the main reason for that is she was the most authentic leader that I came across. But she was straight up with me. She was open with me. She was as real as a person gets in a scenario like that, and it made me reciprocate. I was open with her. I told her things I'd never told other human beings before, and vice versa. She listened, like genuinely listened. I mean, we used to joke about the fact that she'd get distracted by something from time to time, and Mike would start saying green eggs and ham, green eggs and ham, green eggs and ham over and over again until she realized she hadn't been listening to us. But yep. When it mattered, you felt like you were the only person in the world. She was locked in on you, and that was huge. But she paid attention, and this is really important. I was in a band. I liked to sing, and I had mentioned in passing to her that I thought my voice had got about as good as it was going to get without some professional singing lessons. And at the end of that year, I got a little letter from her saying, thanks for your your performance throughout the year and the work that you did and so on. And by way of thanks, there was a $500 voucher in there for professional singing lessons. Now, I'd just got a pay rise because I'd had a change in role. And I could have bought that voucher over and over and over again with the pay rise. But I've forgotten the pay rise now. I'll never forget those vouchers as long as I live because somebody took an interest. So to me, that's a big deal. Something I just mentioned in passing was noted, and Angela found a way to weave this into our working relationship, which I thought was huge. I'm getting emotional now just thinking about it.
I'm curious though, Rob, when it comes to those hard-nosed business leaders, they're saying, yeah, but really, what's the business benefits? Like, why should I give a damn about authentic leadership? What's it going to do to the bottom line, or what's it going to do for my business?
Working under an authentic leader, I think, is practically guaranteed to get you better team performance. And the reason I think that is there's from a psychology perspective, there are only two things that motivate a person, right? There's love and fear. That's basically it. You'll never run as fast as when there's something you love in front of you that's getting away, or something you fear behind you that's catching up. And the thing that concerns me is that in an awful lot of organizations, I see leaders using fear motivators. Yeah. We didn't hit the numbers this week. We better hit them next week. That kind of approach, or the fear of a restructure, redundancies hanging over your head, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of fear motivators in place. When you've got an authentic leader in place, somebody that cares about you, somebody that is purpose driven, somebody has compassion, has empathy, somebody that has all of those traits, the fear goes away. And when the fear goes away, you start with the love motivators, right? You start being there because you want to be there. You start being there because you feel like you're, and I hate to use these words, but part of a family. And maybe it's not the Manson family. But 20 years after working with Angela and that team, I'm still in contact with every single one of them. Yeah. And I still love every single one of them like you wouldn't believe. We did our best work there. We were one of the higher performing teams in that organization. So the level of engagement we had was huge. The retention that was in that team was massive. We all didn't want to go anywhere. Even when Angela left and it all started to go to hell, we were latching onto the memories, if you like. We didn't want to leave even at that point. It was more real. Yeah. And being more real led to us performing better.
Because when I reflect on fantastic leaders I've had the opportunity to work with, to observe and speak to teams and understand the impact it's had on them, they've always had an amazing ability to really connect, to make people feel understood, to feel heard, and as you've touched on, to know the well beyond just the transaction or the task that's got to be done. And that skill set, or that ability to build relationships, also means that they extend beyond their team into how they engage the wider business. Sure. And I find this pretty interesting to watch, because they may do an amazing job in their team, but they also have the ability to connect and anchor in with other, whether it's the finance team, whether it's the legal team, would be those strange marketing folk. They have the ability to actually connect and reach out, to understand those different perspectives. And because they're not sort of changing who they are from meeting to meeting, or at the board level chats through to the front line, exactly what you're going to expect or to see. And I think this makes them quite rare in this environment, because there's no games being played here. You're not exhausted after having engaged or worked with them. But I'm when it came to trying to find the business benefits of authentic leadership, and I wanted to get to the hard numbers that were involved in the environment, it was a little bit challenging, being really upfront with you. Like 2003, the reason that Bill George came up with authentic leadership was because of Enron. He basically saw such a shit show of an environment where ethics got tossed out of the world, and they ran it absolutely into the ground. And he said, there's got to be a better way of running business. And so I think his intent was great. I think his focus on authentic leadership, going, we need to look beyond the way that we've always been doing with that selfish that we have. And it resonated with a lot of people. You see tens of thousands of podcast books, you name it, all on this topic. But the evidence has been a little bit thin. So the only work I could actually get or find in the space was that if you have more engaged people, you actually have better performance. And this is where it starts to be somewhat of a longer bow that's going through. Authentic leadership leads to more engaged team, leads in turn to better performance. But then McKinsey started to come on board, and whilst I hate them with a passion because they're the most unscrupulous lot, I know that a lot of the audience will listen to them in this space simply because they know the numbers. And when they get on board in an environment, there's got to be something in this that actually makes it work. So for McKinsey to kind of get on board with an authentic style of leadership that's coming in space because it actually delivers results, I feel it's got to have some legs in this environment.
Sure.
What's your take on the benefits you've seen from teams actually being responding or being part of a team that's led by an authentic leader?
So I think what we're dealing with here is it's almost a hangover from that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it approach. All of the things that we're talking about, employee engagement, even boosted team performance, you've got to be able to accurately compare that to what happened when you didn't have an authentic leader, whenever that was. These are things that are difficult to manage, to measure rather. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Or it doesn't mean that sometimes we shouldn't just trust our intuition. That if everybody's happy in a team and they're doing some really awesome work and they're all happy with the boss, who cares whether authentic leadership is the silver bullet here? Just let it be. But I always go back to Simon Sinek's talk on the Navy SEALs, where he's talking about high performance versus high trust. And obviously, the Navy SEALs are all high performing, high trust, highest performing organization in the world, according to Simon Sinek. But then he asks them, would you prefer to have a lower trust, high performance guy or a lower performance, higher trust guy? And they always go with the lower performance, higher trust. I can train you how to shoot a rifle, but you better have my back when we go through that door. And his tagline on that is, we have 101 ways in business of measuring performance and practically 0 ways of measuring trust. I think trust is what authenticity in leadership is all around. We can trust our boss to be who they always have been, no matter whether we're coasting because we've just done the best work of our lives or because we're knee deep in the crap because there's a massive change coming our way. They're the rock we can rely on. And that's a huge deal to me.
If that's the rock you can rely on, and that's the positive, let's flip the script on that. Let's look at it from those plonkers of leaders that are perhaps a little bit more traditional in this approach, that are non-authentic. Like how can you spot them?
Yeah, so it's to me anyway, and I'm not sure the data backs this up, but my experience with inauthentic leaders is they will change to suit the person that they're most trying to impress at the time. I've seen this happen where somebody who was a fairly easy, nice person to deal with, a new CEO comes in and the new CEO is hyper aggressive, and all of a sudden this person's hyper aggressive as well because they're trying to weasel their way into the boys club. So you'll see people that are changeable. One of the things that I've noticed is that people who are a little more old school when it comes to leadership tend to collaborate when things are going really, really well and compete when the shit hits the fan. So they shrink into, okay, it's us versus them when things go wrong, whereas they're more than happy to collaborate when things are going right. And when I say when things are going right, I don't mean for the business. I mean for them, for their team, for their little fiefdom, whatever they control. So that's an interesting thing for me is the difference between collaboration when things are going well and competition when they're not. But I think the other thing is, going back to that fear motivator that I mentioned earlier, is you you don't know who you're going to get on a day-to-day basis, and that sort of fear, where you're not really sure where you stand with the boss,
Yep.
that's not a good way to have a high performing and trusting team.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the observations I've had is teams struggle with, what the hell is my job really about? What am I meant to be doing? What does my boss really want from me? Where are the expectations they've got? And so if your boss is kind of shifting or moving the dial that's going through, depending on what space or time of day or they're reacting, the chances of you getting that clarity aren't great. But one of the amazing things I've watched authentic leaders do is, because they know the individuals, they know where that development needs to happen and what their
Sure.
strengths are and actually how to build it. So the sense of trust and the sense of understanding means you get a lot more clarity, and you're not afraid to go, I have no bloody idea what I'm doing here, boss. Can you give me a few clues as to what needs to go? Like, there's a safe moment where you don't feel that you're going to be in trouble for saying, I'm clueless here, which, of course, I'm asking for a friend. That's never happened to me, of course.
Of course not.
Oh,
It's interesting that there's I've come across one scenario reasonably recently, where it's almost like a non-authentic leader is testing you from time to time, testing you to see if they can trust you. I heard about something similar. I don't know if you heard the story about Elon Musk trying to fish out the person who was leaking information, like proprietary information. So what he did was he sent this big long email to everybody in the organization, and he put 2 spaces at different points in every version of that email, so he knew when it was passed on exactly who it came from. I've seen things like that, but more used for testing people's trustworthiness rather than finding out that they're leaking information. Where they would this leader would give this person a piece of information that only they knew, and then see if it got anywhere else to decide whether or not they could trust that person. You don't see that from authentic leaders. I've also heard of scenarios whereby they will say, hey, I want you to do this for me. And when you go off and spend all of your time working and doing it, they go, yeah, that's not what I had in mind. Here's how I'd like you to do it. And the person's like, we just wasted a week of time on this, when you could have just told me up front the way you wanted it done, and I would have done it like that from this point onwards, presuming I agreed with it. But like you say, an authentic leader doesn't treat people like that. They get inside their head. They know what their strengths are, know what their areas for improvement are, and they coach them around that rather than being a boss. Yeah.
On that point, I'm pretty interested to understand some of the reading I was going through is authentic leaders focus very much on building strengths or building on strengths as opposed to much targeting the weakness. And I thought that was an interesting sort of take on why just focus on building out strengths as opposed to let's gloss over or touch up the weaknesses. What's your take on why that would work?
But back to my old mate Simon Sinek, he says that the goal is not to improve your weaknesses. The goal is to play to your strengths and to surround yourself with the people who can do what you can't do. So on top of knowing what your strengths are and the areas that you need to improve, your authentic leader also knows the team and almost sees how those strengths fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. It was one of the things that Angela was also brilliant at, was that she knew if she needed a 4-hour training session on the fly, that I was the guy. She knew if she needed horrific amounts of attention to detail, I wasn't the guy, but Mike Bullock probably was. So she knew exactly where all of our strengths lay and allowed us to play to them. Now, don't get me wrong. It didn't mean that some of us didn't need a little bit of improvement in some areas. Absolutely, we did. There were things that we needed to do as part of our jobs, and that had to be worked on. But in the vast majority of cases, we were pushed to amplify our strengths. In fact, Angela would push herself to recognize all of our strengths and then um, help us to dial them up to 11. That's a big deal. I think most authentic leaders will understand that playing to strengths is important. You can't fix weaknesses, and even if you did, there's a reason they became weaknesses in the first place. Yeah. So if I work on a weakness, at best I'm going to make it average, and I'm going to hate it the whole time that I do it. Again, not a recipe for big performance, not a recipe for big happiness and engagement in an organization. But you let me play to my strengths, and all of a sudden I feel like a superhero, and I'm doing my best work. If you've got somebody who can plug the gaps that I've got, well, that's how you get. That's to quote Rocky Balboa. That's how winning's done.
This raises a couple of questions though for me. It's like if you're playing to the strengths though, you're going to though be thrown into environments or spaces where it's new to you, right? Where what got you here is not going to get you there, kind of thing. And so what I'm kind of pretty curious around is what does it mean to be an authentic leader if you suck in an environment which is all new to you, and you know that you're going to need a new set of skill sets or a new attitude to take this on? How does that sort of reconcile?
Yeah, so if you're in a brand new environment where you're going to need a new set of skills, one of the things that we were just talking about strengths and playing to strengths. If your strength is authentic leadership and you're thrown into an environment that you don't know, you're probably going to end up leading a bunch of people who've been in that environment for a while, right? If you've been thrown deep into it. So you trust them, right? You realize that your job is to get the roadblocks out of their way and let them do their best work. Your job is to understand their strengths and help them amplify them. Yeah. It may take you some time to work that out, but you got to trust those people, right? And I don't mean by testing them with emails. I mean, trust them until they give you a reason not to. But to me, that's never been much of a drama. Like there was a time that I was thrown into an organization to lead what was a reasonably dysfunctional team, a group of people who were very much challenged by each other, were very much competing, even within the team. We're not. We're okay with throwing each other under the bus from time to time, you know. So I went in and I was thinking, I'm going to have to learn how this organization works. I'm going to have to learn what all of the problems are with these people and why they're not getting on cohesively and so on. And then I went, just be you, do your leadership thing, everything will be fine. And what opened it up for me was in one of our very first meetings, I let them know what my expectations were of them. And I said, we've got all these objectives we need to hit, but let's talk about behavioral expectations. I only have two, and I didn't make them up. I stole them from other organizations. One came from Google. It's don't be evil. So if there's a good way you can do something and an evil way you can do something, pick the good way. And the second one was from Atlassian. It used to be one of their stated objectives to don't F the customer, was the way they put it. And I said to them, I said, our customer are our trainees, the participants in our training programs. So if there's a way that you're asked to do something that screws them over, don't come to me and I'll back you up on it. But once I told them what my behavioral expectations were of them, I said, right now, what are your behavioral expectations of me? And they went, you need to protect us from this evil team over here that's trying to. And I was like, okay, now I get why they're not cohesive. They're terrified. They feel like this team over here is trying to steal their job. So I got a real insight by going, and what are your behavioral expectations of me, of the reasons for this dysfunction to begin with, and that gave me an opportunity to solve that. It took them a while, but they trusted me within a few months, and we went on to get some awesome stuff done.
If that moment of terrification or being terrified, if you're a technical folk and you've been bloody good at doing that for donkeys, right? And suddenly you get your first people gig though that's coming in there.
Yeah.
like the skill sets that got you here is not what's going to get you in there. So I'm just keen. How does that work with being an authentic leader when it's the very first time you're walking into that gig?
Yeah. So I've always been a believer in that step being the hardest one that you will ever make in business. I think it's harder to go from being a technical specialist to being a leader of technical specialists than it is when you get promoted to being the CEO for the first time. I think that first step is it's a doozy. Yeah. And it's a doozy because organizations don't prep you for it. They don't tell you that what got you here won't get you there. Yeah. They don't help you to develop the skills that you need as a leader. And by that, I'm talking about very practical skills. Uh, so that you can almost overlay authentic leadership on top of it, if that makes sense. We spoke about in a previous podcast an organization that I worked with that do a thing called the Emerging Leader Program, where they teach you that those practical skills, how to set objectives, give feedback, do coaching, manage poor performance, motivate teams, softer skills, but still quite practical. There's a process you can follow to get those done. And then you get to layer the even softer stuff of authentic leadership across the top. But let's not fool ourselves that this is something that anybody can pick up and run with. Yep. You may find that as a technical specialist that's been promoted into a leadership position, you're just like, nah, let me back to what I used to do before because this is hellish. And that's something we need to bear in mind as well. We've all sort of been pushed into, you've got to climb the corporate ladder. You've got to go up into the leadership positions. Some of us don't want to. Some of us just want to be the tech specialists. Some of us want to be the geeks and left to do that. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it's wonderful to be self-aware enough to go, yeah, leadership isn't for me. You know?
I think the rub, though, is like I still want to pay my mortgage. So the only path to career or salary growth is one where I must become a people leader. And I think this is why you see 1 in 5 leaders don't want to be a people leader. There's an astounding stat that I was reading the other day that came out. I think it's PwC talked about 82% of leaders should not be a leader, right? It was a phenomenal number. And for me, if you kind of think about the list of what it takes to be an authentic leader, where it's like you've got a clear purpose, that's not just about, hey, we're here to make money, right? Yeah. You give a shit about people, right? You're consistent, your values led that's going through, your self-discipline, you've got the ability to have a strong self-awareness. That's a pretty bloody tall order. Sure. So when you say it's the hardest jump to go from technical to people leader, bloody hell yes. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think what can we then do as mentors, as guides, as leaders to kind of cultivate the next generation that's coming up? Like, how do we spot these individuals? They've got the potential to be authentic leaders.
Right. How do we spot the people that have the potential to be authentic leaders? That's an interesting question.
This is when your coffee needs to really, or Irish tea is just not going to cut it, I feel here, Rob. This is where you need to go into coffee.
This is where I need to start hitting the whiskey cabinet to try and get an answer to this one.
Well, because I had a hell of a morning that came here just to come on here. Like, my routine is to have a coffee to be really strong, and it has just full cream milk, nothing else. We've got guests staying over here, and they've filled the fridge, or my wife did, should I say, with lactose-free milk. And it's like, I poured that as Holy Mother Mary. This is going to be a tough morning that's in there with this kind of coffee kicking in. So if I'm not quite myself, it's the lactose milk.
It's the lactose-free milk. Fair enough. Yeah. How do we spot these authentic leaders? There's a bit of self-awareness in them. And I know that's, since Socrates was a boy, we've been talking about the importance of knowing thyself. Yeah. But there's a bit of self-awareness in them. They know what their strengths are. They know the areas that they're not so hot in. And that self-awareness doesn't ever come across as arrogance.
Yeah.
It's there's a humility to it, which I think is interesting. They'll be straight up. They'll be honest with you. that's another way that you spot those folks. You never get the feeling that they're trying to hide something, or you've got to read between the lines with them, or rarely anyway. There's a consistency with them, which is important.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to decision making, you can trust them to make the kind of decisions they've made before, whether they're under pressure or doing just fine. You'll see them adapt to the people around them
Yep.
without compromising their values, and I think that's important. So earlier we were talking about the hyper aggressive CEO that comes in, and now the senior management team are starting to become hyper aggressive because of it.
Yep.
You'll see an authentic leader in that scenario adapt to that hyper aggressive style, but not become hyper aggressive themselves.
Yep.
Presuming it's not one of their values, which we would assume it isn't if they're an authentic leader. They will find just about any opportunity to coach.
Okay.
And I think that's a big deal. It's there's another excellent boss that I had in the past used to say to me, "Some days you win, some days you learn." And anytime I would go to them and go, "This screwed up," or "This has gone awful," he'd go, "Some days you win, some days you learn," and would go straight into a coaching conversation with me in a way that it sounded, it seemed so natural that it took me a few years afterwards to work out that it was actually a coaching conversation. I thought we were just shooting the shit. But it was really, really, really well done. And I think that's one of the ways that you can spot authentic leaders as well, is that they will often look for any opportunity to coach someone.
Do you feel though that the way in which we're recruiting leaders, right, into our teams needs to change in any way? The only reason I'm asking this is because, like, I see a lot of frustration from both leaders and talent that's applying in the space, going, "This is not working. We're not getting the kind of talent, or we're not getting the kind of opportunities we want."
Right? Yeah, and there's this is you see, I'm trying not to go down the cynical hole again, man. This happens at least once per podcast where I feel the darkness beckoning me. Organizations, when they're recruiting people, need to be honest about where they're at and where they're going. Yeah. There is nothing worse than an organization saying it's looking for an authentic leader in a certain space. You applying for it thinking, "This is awesome. This is where I get to play to my strengths." And then you get there and you find out you're just dropped into the most toxic culture on the planet, and you have no business being there. You end up, as an authentic leader, becoming a terrorist inside the organization, because you're either, okay, I'm either going to change this place from the inside, or they're going to fire me. Let's see which happens first. So that's a huge deal for me, is that if you were honest about the fact that the culture needs changing in your organization with your prospective candidates, they'd be much more open to it. Yeah. But there are times when being an authentic leader in that kind of scenario will just get you fired, or made redundant, or restructured out, or however they want to get rid of you, but you'll be gotten rid of because they're actually not interested in authentic leadership. They're interested in the status quo, things being the way that they've always been, people protecting their personal power, all of that wonderful political stuff that we've come to know and love in organizations.
So this kind of makes me a little nervous, because like you want to care for authentic leaders. So what can we do to make sure, or what can authentic leaders do when they're applying for jobs or applying for organizations to get clues like something's not quite lining up here?
Yeah. So if possible, meet with the team. Meet with the team that you're expected to lead. Just perhaps ask the hiring manager if it's cool if you come in and have a 20-minute coffee with them. Because whereas and I don't mean any disrespect to my colleagues in people and culture here, but they will rarely tell you about what's going wrong with a culture in an organization. Whereas a team that's looking at you with an expectation that you may lead them in the future is far more likely to tell you what's going down. Yeah. Where possible, talk to other folks that have worked in that organization. Ask them to give you the warts and all version, because there really is nothing quite as soul destroying as thinking, yes, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna fall into a culture that is absolutely guaranteed to suit me down to the ground, and then finding out that you're up to your neck in something you'd rather not be up to your neck in. Yeah.
I think the hard part, though, is when you get hired by a leader A, because you're not joining a company, you're actually joining a person you want to be led by. That's
Sure.
going that by. And then there's an org restructure, and that person moves to either a different part of the organization or leaves that organization. Suddenly you're reporting into somebody new.
Yeah.
I got to see this with an amazing leader who was hired. He was super excited about joining the organization. They were very upfront. This is not exactly where we would love it to be as an organization. They talked about the warts and all, but it was the connection with the leader was the most important thing he was looking for. They absolutely got the same values that were kicking in. They had the same vision for the purpose that were kicking in, and these were really important. The moment that leader moved on, or their boss moved on, it went to hell in a handbasket. And what I watched this individual, they didn't just say, I'm resigned or I'm quit or I'm going to burn the place down. They fought like hell for a good couple of years to actually try to continue that purpose, to continue that vision, to lead with those values. But all I did is watch from the sidelines a fabulous top talent get burnt out in that space. And so what advice would you give to leaders when they're in that moment when they suddenly go, holy cow, things are quite different here. So I've gone through the recruitment, I've been hired, I've been here a little while now. I've got a choice. What advice would you give them?
Honestly, my advice would be, we've heard that old saying, if people join an organization and leave a manager, leave a leader. And I think that's true. Yep. I think if you've got a new boss in place, your old boss was awesome and you got on perfectly well and you did some of your best work under them, and your new boss has a different set of values to you and doesn't fit with your approach, is not as authentic a leader as you are, that sort of thing, that's soul destroying. And you have two choices at that point. You either shrink to fit, which means you leave your authenticity and leadership behind and start playing the same games your new boss is.
Yep.
Or you walk away. And my advice is walk away. That's the only way you hang on to your humanity in that kind of scenario. It's absolutely soul destroying to shrink to fit.
So this is a pretty low, sad moment to end the podcast on there. Quite depressing that we're going to have for folks out there that's in there. But where I'd rather pivot to here, Rob, is what made you really resonate, or what made authentic leadership really resonate for you? Why have you been such a passionate advocate? Because this is not the first nor the last time you've ever spoken about authentic leadership.
I think I've been really lucky, Matt. I think I've been really lucky in the fact that when people ask me what I look for in a job, when I used to work for various organizations, I would tell them I looked for a good boss, a good team, and some sort of meaningful work. And the fact that I worked in people and culture for most of my time, worked in training and coaching and talent management and stuff like that, meant that it was very easy for me to be purpose driven. What my purpose was to watch those little light bulb moments go off in people's heads when they were being trained or being coached or what have you. So the meaningful work was always there. Finding a boss, finding a team that were awesome was the big deal for me. And I was lucky enough to have 3, maybe 4 bosses that were genuine, authentic leaders early in my career that I learned from and went, that's who I want to be. When I grow up, I want to be that person. So I was hugely lucky in that regard. But what I noticed was when you start, and bear in mind, I was trying to bring some of the facets of authentic leadership into play before I even knew what authentic leadership was. It was just me mimicking the people that I'd seen. What I noticed was the improvement in the performance of me, of my team, the improvement in our cohesion, the trust that we had for each other, meant that going to work was a happy thing. I never understood people who were like, "Oh, I hate my job." I was like, "Well, why would you continue to do it then? I love my job." Um, don't get me wrong. If there was a way to earn a whole heap of money without doing that kind of work, I would probably be sailing around the world somewhere. But for something that you spent a third of your life doing, it was fun, and I made some firm friends along the way that I still have 20, 25 years later. I think that's important. That level of fulfillment in work comes from authentic leadership, and I was lucky enough to find that early in my career. The other thing that I think is a huge deal is that authentic leadership doesn't rely on you having a team.
Yeah.
Doesn't rely on you being in a certain spot in the hierarchy, that sort of thing. There are people in organizations, I used to call them cultural ambassadors, right? The people that really get the culture of the organization and almost without knowing it become custodians of that culture, if you like. There's one guy that comes to mind, Timo Beach, who I used to work with at Virgin, and Timo worked in a variety of roles there, but none of them were leadership positions. Yet you ask anybody who worked at Virgin Mobile at that time who the cultural ambassadors were, and Timo will be first on the list. He was a guy that just completely embodied. He still is a guy that completely embodied that culture and was amazing with it. So and when you look at what makes these people cultural ambassadors, they have those same traits that authentic leaders have, and they are authentic leaders. Yeah. They just don't fit in the hierarchy. The influence they have in an organization is absolutely monstrous. So I was lucky enough to be exposed to some really good bosses that taught me well, and I was lucky enough to be involved in organizations that really allowed those cultural ambassadors to shine. And to me, that was how I learned about authentic leadership and realized the importance of it.
Authentic leaders, they help build high trust organizations, great teams, and lifelong friendships. Thanks for listening at Corporate Therapy. If you've got a story about authentic leaders you've found in your career, hit us up in the comments. Share those stories. We love hearing from smarter folks than ourselves. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got a button floating around the screen somewhere. We're also on Spotify, LinkedIn, and Substack. Next week, we're going to be unpacking the dumb stuff that organizations measure and why it keeps creating the kind of crap behaviors that embarrass all of us. Catch you next time.
Sounds like fun. See you then.